you know, what's going on here then. And just so I can get my money's worth out of this hat, I'm going to do another couple of knee bends, if you'll just bear with me. So I'll exercise again. I think that should do it. These police boxes, you can see them all over Glasgow. I think they were introduced in the 1920s and sort of phased out in the 1960s. They were all originally red. I think they were perhaps just painted blue in the 1960s because of perhaps the popularity of the Doctor Who television programme. And they were there to provide a means of communication between police officers and their station. And they could also go in there, have a wee rest, have a sarnie, and detain somebody who they wanted to press charges against or whatever. But in actual fact, if you think about the television programme Doctor Who, as we all know, the inside of these boxes is actually much bigger than you would think by looking at the outside. And that, combined with the fact that, as we all know again, in the old days everybody was much smaller than they are now. And you could indeed fit about 36 police officers into one of these boxes, complete with desks, and about half a dozen police horses, because the horses were much smaller back then as well. I think police horses were maybe about sort of about that sort of size, you know. Would I kid you? Anyway, enough frivolity. Frivolity is actually quite a hard word to say at this time of the morning. Back in 1778, when John MacArthur made his excellent plan of the city of Glasgow, Glasgow didn't have a police force. They just had a body of watchmen or city guard with long coats and long wooden staffs with which they would try and keep the peace. And they were based in the Lay Kirk, a church that was on the Trongate, attached to the building, or the little steeple that still remains, the Tron steeple. But 1 year later, in 1779, there was an attempt made to get a police force up and running, but it fizzled out, it ran out of money. About 9 years later, there was another attempt to get a police force up and running. This one lasted a wee bit longer, but again, it fizzled out because of a lack of money. Why does money always come into it? Huh? And it wasn't really until the year 1800 that a proper and lasting police force was established in Glasgow.
The force had just 9 officers. Not a lot for a city of some 80,000 inhabitants. But given that at least 3 of them would have been out in the street at any one time, and not stuck in an office or in vans, there was probably more officers actually on the street than there are now. This small force was also supplemented by 68 watchmen. We can in fact see one of those early police officers in this painting of the Trongate by William Simpson, dating to the mid-19th century. There he is, with his long tunic, top hat and baton.
Back in the year 1800, when Glasgow Police were first established, like the watchmen or the city guard that came before them, they originally had their base in the Trongate, in the Lay Kirk, the church that used to be there. It was burnt down, and the Tron steeple, an old structure that still exists today. But then in 1825, Glasgow's first purpose-built police station, the Central Police Office, was built right there at the corner of Bell Street and what is now Albion Street. At that time it was called South Albion Street. And if we look at the first edition Ordnance Survey map or town plan, we can see exactly what was in that building. We can see cells, lieutenants' rooms, detectives' rooms, waiters' rooms. What did they need waiters for? And we can also see that the lane that ran around the building was called Police Lane. And that will now lie underneath the market that you can see there now, because the building and the lane have gone. But then in 1906, the Glasgow Central Police Office was moved to what is now Turnbull Street. At that time it was called Lower Green Street. And that's where we're going now. Of all the old police station buildings that I'll show you in this video, none of them are police stations these days. A bit like banks, I suppose. So that's at Turnbull Street. Used to be Lower Green Street. Central Police Office opened, I think it was 1906. And you know, when you look at that building, it's not hard to see how buildings can get themselves into difficulties when they're not properly maintained. It's an absolute verdant jungle sprouting from the frontage. And you know, if I lie carp on about old buildings and how, why aren't we preserving them and maybe repurposing them, turning them into housing and so on and so forth. I sometimes think that as a mere layman, we don't always fully understand what happens behind the scenes, and I think there is no doubt that Glasgow City Council are doing what they can to repurpose old buildings where possible. I think for us ordinary folk, it's maybe not happening as quickly as we'd like, but I think there's no doubt that it happens. The building behind me, for example, is going to be repurposed. It will be saved and turned into housing at some point. That the plans are already afoot. And that's a great thing, you know. I'm not convinced that the building will last it a great deal longer, given the state it's in with all the stuff growing out of it. And you know, often these buildings, it wasn't just one structure. You maybe had a group of structures all kind of linked together that performed a number of functions. Reception, offices, cells, a court, and perhaps facilities for vehicles or even horses. And I think if we have a wee peek through the gate there, we might actually get a glimpse of the cells. Let's see.
This is Turnbull Street's Central Police Office in 1931, with an impressive row of police vehicles parked outside. And here's the courtroom in 2023, clearly unused and in a state of some dereliction. The cells, like police cells everywhere, were never meant to be comfortable, and often the bed was nothing more than a slab of concrete incorporated into the structure. Many of Glasgow's old police stations still exist. None of them are police stations anymore, most now superseded by a modern station built not far away, and usually in a rather typically boring architectural style that lacks the statues and stone carvings of their predecessor. This, for example, is the old police station in Maitland Street. Columns, carvings, and a look of considerable grandness. We can see interior detail in this mid-19th century town plan. There's a watchman's hall, lieutenant's rooms, a superintendent's room, and a whole load of cells. These were buildings designed to impress, very different to today's modern police stations, which by and large are just boxes with windows. When you look at Maitland Street and Google Street View, it's very hard to believe that it ever looked like this. With tenements, shawls and pubs and, well, I think the word is atmosphere. Because these days, while Maitland Street still has a police office, it bears the typical bland look of a modern world that has somehow lost its way. It no longer impresses, it's just a place of work. Here's the old Gorbals police office, built in 1895. It was, I believe, a police office, training centre and barracks, and today is occupied by a range of organisations, none of whom are the police. Again, it bears an impressive frontage. When you entered as a trainee police officer and discovered new skills, like how to twirl your baton, you were meant to feel proud of being part of an organisation that built such awe-inspiring structures. I can't think of one police office in Glasgow today where you could say the same. Sadly, what was probably the grandest police station of them all has been demolished. It used to sit in Cranston Street, beside the fire station. This is it around 1880, as photographed by Thomas Annan. And if you look close in the bottom right, you can see the top hat of an early police officer. I mean, just look at the decorated stonework and statues. This was a police station and a half, architecturally speaking. And here we see it again in 1971, surrounded by piles of rubble and ready to be razed to the ground. Thankfully, photos were taken just before demolition, and we can also see inside. Another concrete bed with a concrete pillow. No messing about. If you're drunk and incapable, you'd probably find it strangely comfortable. Since its early days, the range of tasks undertaken by Glasgow police officers has changed and expanded, but still the main goal is to keep the peace, by whatever means. They have faced danger at the hands of razor-wielding youths, policed football matches without a view of the game, kept warm when it was cold on the back of horses, did their best to blend into crowds, chased down wee old women on their horse, looked suitably staid in group photos. They did their best to hide their disappointment when discovering that the station they had been assigned to look just like somebody's house. They have stood in the middle of umpteen roads and waved their arms around, stood for long periods at doorways. Girls steamed up on motorbikes and tapped their toes at any number of parades. They've also stood in front of statues looking mildly awkward, or looked mean and tough, just like Big Rachel, a 6'4" woman from Partick, who was sworn in as a special constable during the Partick riots of 1875. You wouldn't want to mess with that.
I suppose old police stations are a bit like old banks. We've lost most of them. I mean, we still have quite a lot of, in the same way they have a lot of old bank buildings still remaining, we do still have a certain number of police stations still remaining, but you know, we've also lost quite a lot of pretty stunning structures. This is Partick's modern police station just behind me. And you know, like every walk of life, the police are struggling these days. They're struggling for want of money. Every area of the country is just not getting as much money as it needs to survive. I think the police are constantly struggling with funds and trying to balance the books. And one of the many consequences of that is that they're selling off some of the modern buildings. We've already lost the police offices at Pitt Street and the police station at Finnieston. There's more that are set to be closed down and are probably getting closed as I speak. There's simply not enough money to keep all these facilities going. There's not enough money to keep enough police on the streets. You'd be struggling to find one or two constables walking in the streets of Glasgow today. There's just not enough money. The days when we kind of had the kind of idea that there was a policeman in every street corner, these days have gone. And I think, you know, for any number of reasons, including this lack of money in every walk of life, sometimes when I'm up the town, maybe it's an old guy thing, but I just get that kind of strange feeling that society is breaking down around me. When I switch on a television and look at the news, I get the same sort of feeling as if the social fabric that binds us all together is just being unpicked and coming apart. And when that reaches whatever conclusion it will reach, we're going to need more police officers than we've ever had since 1800, when Glasgow Police were first set up. I'm Eddie Burns. Take care.
The officers of Glasgow Police, now part of Strathclyde Police, continue to learn new skills to prepare them for a modern world that is changing apace. Like how to look nonchalant when there's a building on fire behind you, or there's a big plume of black smoke looming over your head. How to keep a safe distance when there are reports of grenades being thrown from a tenement window in Partick. And when to remember to pack sunscreen because it's going to be a sunny day. And they've also learned when to allow young folk to pat their horse. Glasgow Police, the best.